as an executive, you need to negotiate with the manufacturer and try and convince them that I understand your way, but this is not the best way of doing things here.
Hello and welcome to the Auto Ethnographer. I'm John Stech, your host on this journey. We travel the globe to bring you stories about culture and the global automotive industry. Fasten your seatbelt and let's get started. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Auto Ethnographer. We have a great guest here lined up today, Stavros Paraskevaides. He's visiting us from Greece, where his native Greece. We're going to talk a little bit about a couple of brands that are in his career history and some of the locations that he has been working in the auto industry over the past several decades. So he started in Toyota in his native Greece. He then moved over to Mercedes-Benz, first in Greece, but then ultimately for about a 5-year stint in the United States. After that, he returned to Greece, again with Mercedes-Benz, both in Greece as well as Serbia, Montenegro. During the Daimler Chrysler years, he did a very small stint with the Chrysler, Jeep, and Dodge brands under Daimler Chrysler, and then began something very different. He spent about 8 years in the Middle East, first in Saudi Arabia, and then ultimately in Qatar. Very different experience, first working on the BMW and Rolls-Royce brands, and then ultimately in Qatar working with Chevrolet, Hyundai, and Genesis. He's since gone on to found his own consulting company, SP4A, and started a premium and classic vehicle repair workshop, Motorworks, in Greece, which is something we'd also like to hear a little bit about during our conversation. Stavros, welcome to the Auto Ethnographer. It's great to have you.
Well, it's great to see you again. I mean, we have a history that goes back, I guess, 2.5 decades now. So we are both getting a bit grayer, I should say, wider.
We crossed paths at Mercedes-Benz in the US, which, as I mentioned, you spent about 5 years there at Mercedes-Benz USA. And you had been working with the brand in Greece, primarily focused on more commercial-oriented vehicles, commercial vans. So when you made this jump across the ocean, um, must have been a big shock for you because I think you spent most of your or all of your career in Greece prior to that.
Yes, I mean, I remember walking in the office on day one and thinking I'm used to dealing with 15 dealers, and now I need to deal with 320. And in my office, I mean, surrounding my office, I can see 20 to 30 individuals a day, and here on the first floor we have about 400. So I think immediately the numbers just fell onto my head, and I realized that the scale of the challenge is going to be completely at a different level. Um, what was for me very, I would say, relieving was the fact that I was confident that I knew how Mercedes Benz works and I knew the car business. So I was willing to learn and adapt to a new market, and that kind of, let's say, reduced to a degree my stress because obviously coming from a market of a few thousand units to a market of a couple of 100,000 units at the time was quite daunting.
It's a huge change, certainly in terms of the scope and the scale, the number of dealers, and just the size of the United States. Right? It's an entire continent which behaves almost like individual countries because the regions are very different just from the customer tastes.
When you're willing to learn and when you're willing to try and understand the idiosyncrasies of each individual market, irrespective of the size, you're going to be able to adapt. If you're looking for solutions, you're going to find a way to provide those, hopefully. So, yes, Mercedes Benz USA was a huge, I would say, university for me because it just taught me how to work for the first time with, I would say, to a degree, the Anglo-Saxon business culture. I was more used to the German business culture, and before that, to the Japanese business culture. And as the years went on and time went on, I was just constantly, I think, enhancing my knowledge and experiences, and evolving uh, into a better professional.
What did you think was the biggest change? Right, like you said, it's an Anglo-Saxon business environment, and you know, Anglo-Saxon, whether it's the Americans or the British, tend to be more low context cultures. So you say what you think, right? There's no double meanings. It's just, it is what it is. And I think Greece is a bit more of a high context culture, and the Japanese even much more so. What was the biggest challenge for you?
There is positive in everything. I mean, you just don't need to look for it, and that's my stance. Working with the Germans for many years, I have learned that you need to be precise. You sometimes need to be absolute. You need to be a proper technocrat, and I have nothing against that because I'm an engineer by training. So I kind of enjoy that to a degree. Uh, the difference, I think, in the, let's say, North American or US or Anglo-Saxon approach is that I think people are much more focused on the outcome. And sometimes in German mentality, we're more focused on the process to get to the outcome. And is that good? Is that sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. Sometimes when there is an urgency, the German approach can be time consuming, and seeking the perfect solution uh, can allow the situation to potentially go out of control, and the outcome to be negative. Uh, I think the Anglo-Saxon model is a lot more focused on the result and then trying to find a way to get to that. So it's more flexible in that sense. And obviously, when you're an executive in an organization that is highly structured, it's a little bit less stressful. So I wouldn't say there is one better than the other. Depends on the situation. Certain situations, one approach is better. In another situation, the other approach can be more fruitful. Now, I came from a culture that obviously Greece borders between Europe and the Middle East. The more east you go, the more haggling takes place about everything. Emotions, negotiations, these things are integrated into the culture, whether it's family or business. It doesn't make too much difference. So the further west, let's say, you move, you need to adapt your approach. Now, the fact that I have been educated in the British educational system probably helped me quite a bit in being able to shift when necessary from one to the other. So I think due to my culture, I have in my DNA an embedded element of flexibility, I should say, or I should say openness into seeking solutions into different situations rather than just always following strict operating procedures.
Certainly makes a lot of sense. And was there one of the two cultures, that the German or the American one, that you felt that you adjusted to easier, that you felt more comfortable slipping into? You mentioned the education through the British schools.
I think adapting to the US market for me was, I would say, easier than adapting to the Middle Eastern market. Um, because yes, the language between the colleagues in Germany and the colleagues in the US might have not been identical, but it was easier to bridge and find the common ground. Now, when you're talking about the Middle East, things are different. And there I was representing again German brands in the middle of the Arabian Peninsula. So we're talking, I would say, 180 degrees, completely polarized situation in terms of communication and negotiation. Because uh, I think it's not by chance that if we look at the expats in the Middle East, I would say that the representation from Germans is much lower than other nationalities, and that is because I believe people that have grown up in a very structured environment with uh, have learned to follow rules and processes find it sometimes quite difficult to adapt into an environment that's so, literally sometimes you constantly need to improvise every hour to survive in certain cases. So adapting to the US culture was a lot easier for me than it was to the Middle Eastern one.
Moving on, I guess, to the Middle East culture a little bit more. You were running actually the brands BMW and Rolls-Royce in Saudi Arabia. Did you have multiple locations? You were one location.
So I joined one of the largest automotive groups as the managing director for BMW and Rolls-Royce initially, and later on I became the senior VP of the group, and I also had under my belt Jaguar, Land Rover, and Lincoln, and we had more than 20 locations and 1,500 employees. So it was a completely different experience, because the only commonality, I would say, you have with the western part of the world when it comes to operations or the business is probably the facilities, which are somewhat similar due to the CI specs or constraints or whatever you want to call them. From that onwards, almost nothing is the same. From the legal environment that you operate in, the multicultural employee environment that you need to deal with, to the families that are sometimes managing the business in different ways, and you have rotating boards and chairman in some company. So the environment is completely different from anything that anyone is used to, let's say in Europe or North America at least.
So within that organization, then, as I understand, in Saudi Arabia, my parents had spent time living there back in the early 1990s. So my understanding is that depending on the job, you really have different nationalities doing particular jobs, right? So I think it's unlikely that you have Saudis actually working in the workshop. I'm guessing. Is that a correct assumption, or am I incorrect?
Traditionally in the Middle East, the locals would not be involved in a business like cars or automotive. And the fact is that there are many factors, from social factors, educational factors, so on and so forth. And these countries, and Saudi, I will talk about Saudi, is a little bit different, but if we're talking for the rest of the countries, whether it's United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, or Qatar, we're talking about countries extremely wealthy in fossil fuels, and obviously countries that have low population, native population. So obviously the fact that the country is very wealthy, in many ways it's reflected that the wealth is distributed also to a degree to its residents or to the native residents, and therefore these people are quite well off. And due to the fact that they do travel overseas and they have different experiences, they expect high quality of services and options. And what's the easiest way? You have money, you just buy it. You buy the expertise, you bring people over, you have them do that for you, and you offer them a tax free environment most of the time. And therefore, you can attract, let's say, for the higher paying jobs, executives potentially from the region or from Europe or the rest of the world. And for the technical jobs or labor intensive jobs, then you can go to subcontinental Asia or Southeast Asia and get manpower that is to a degree skilled, and it has a lower cost. So this is the environment. Now, if you go to Saudi Arabia, it's quite different because in Saudi Arabia, the local population is actually large, and there you have a big country, very wealthy country, but the level of skills is still low, and especially technical skills. Because when you go to banks, obviously you'll find local people working in banks, working for the government, and in the public sector, overwhelmingly will be local. But when it comes to technical professions, which are harder, and let's say the working conditions are more challenging, people don't really are not really attracted to those. I mean, we are starting to face that problem in the Western world too nowadays. That people want to avoid technical and jobs that are heavy on the body, let's say. So that means that you will have in your management team potentially locals, but as you go further down the ranks and the pay grade, let's say, then you will not find any locals because they're simply not interested, either not interested in that jobs, or those skills are not available. And that makes it extremely challenging, as the language, quote unquote, that you talk to these people and you try to manage them and motivate them is not one, but it's multiple, and you need to adapt. You need to constantly adapt, and you need to constantly translate the language so you can effectively communicate.
Clearly, not only language, right? Because different, regardless of the specific words, there are different understandings and different work styles for different, cultures. So if you have three different cultures in sales and workshop and and other functions, maybe the parts warehouse, it's got to be very difficult to get everybody moving in the same direction. I can only imagine. How did you navigate that?
Fundamentally, I always say, respect the individual. So you need. My philosophy is that we are all expats. We go into a foreign country for a common purpose, and that is to be financially at a better position so we can support our families, educate our children. So I always try to remember that all these people were in this country for the same fundamental purpose. So that means that we all have a common goal. Maybe it's not a business goal, but we all have a common goal. So this means that we have a base from which we can start discussing and understanding each other. Then we talk about the business and we say, okay, guys, we came here to work. We have nothing because we have also there's a lot of issues that have to do with hostility. Different ethnic groups or ethnic castes that need to be sitting around the same table, and you can tell that that's embedded in their DNA, and they're looking each other with suspicion, or they don't want to deal with people, or they will come and tell you, boss, I don't want to talk with these guys because these guys, my grandfather, whatever. So you need to make clear to everybody that we are here for a common purpose. We are all good human beings, and we just have to find the best way we can to work together and bring a result. And if the company prospers, we are all going to take a bit of that. And it sounds a lot easier than it actually is, because there is in the Middle East there is a constant. Um, the political situation is constantly in flux, and there is a lot of animosity sometimes between countries in the region or due to religious reasons. And many times the governments take decisions. And for example, let's say there was a period that when I was in Qatar, that there was poor diplomatic relations with Egypt. Now, Egyptian workforce is very prominent in Qatar, and suddenly the government said, you know what, no more visas, and whatever visa expires, you need to go home. Suddenly, you're faced with a problem because either you have people that you have recruited and you're expecting them to come on board and they can't join you, and you have people that are serving you and suddenly they're disappearing. So you have these type of challenges that you don't have in other parts of the world. And on top of those, you have, I mean, COVID was a horrible situation, that sometimes we couldn't even send the bodies of people that passed away due to the virus because of political reasons. We couldn't send them back to their families. So when operating in this environment, multi-ethnic, and I would say also and multi-religious, it brings complications that are not relevant to the job itself, but they affect so deeply the social environment around it that it becomes a part of the business problem, and you need to solve it as an executive.
That's a huge challenge. Uh, You mentioned visas, right? Usually visas can be 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. So I assume that you had a lot of turnover at these different organizations, so that you had people coming in and leaving again within 1 or 2 or 3 years. In Mercedes Benz in the United States, you tend to have long-term employees at the dealers, right? People are there for 10, 20, 30 years or more.
In Saudi Arabia or Qatar or these countries in the Gulf, you have families that have literally lived there for decades, but they're always on visa. They can never take a permanent residency. So that's one of the other challenges, that these people know that they have a termination date. So when my even if I retire at that company, it means that I need to go back after 30 years to my country where I'm a foreigner again. That's another burden that you see in your employees too. Many times you see that. So I remember I had a gentleman from Pakistan. He was working for us for 35 years, and he kept asking me to extend his contract. And I said, look, the company policy is that we cannot extend any more your contract. We have already extended 5 years. And he came one day crying into my office. He was already 65, and he came crying into my office, and he said, Mr. Stavros, he said, I have to go back. I don't know anybody back home after 35 years. What am I going to do? My kids are here. They are also working, sponsored by some other business, and yes, I will have money, but and a house, but what am I going to do with that? And so all these things are all the situations you need to deal with them, because you need to have your staff motivated, and you need to have your staff uh, um, feeling secure in order to deliver the results. So it is very challenging. Um or with issues, for example, Palestine is in conversation, obviously, for a long time now, and it has been, and unfortunately it will be, I guess. We had people that were um, Palestinians from Palestinian parents, born in Saudi. Saudi Arabia will not grant citizenship to these people. So they actually are trapped and employed in that country, and they cannot go anywhere because they don't have a passport. So they have a document, they can literally live and die there, but they cannot go anywhere else.
What an interesting and complicated situation.
And these are the people you work with, and you need to have empathy. You need to understand their situation, and you need to see how you can integrate them into the business. And at the same, I mean, from my end, I always felt a responsibility, social responsibility, against any person, and any employee, to try and make their life better as much as possible. So the complexities there are huge, and you end up spending most of your time doing quote unquote HR management, because you need to ensure that the organization is staffed properly, people are focused on what they are supposed to be doing, because obviously the manufacturer, whether it's in the US or China or Japan or France, they want results, and they don't care about the specifics of your problems. Uh, in any case, in most countries, these are general distributors, and the purpose that the OEMs place general distributors is that they are either not allowed due to local legislation, or they don't want to get into that situation. So they will quote unquote outsource the distribution of vehicles and solve their problem. So it's your problem.
It's certainly a challenging environment on how to, align strategically and motivate such a diverse employment base. Let's flip the script over to the other side. What about the customer? Is that a more homogeneous customer? So if we're talking, for example, BMW in Saudi Arabia, or I'm not going to talk about Rolls Royce because that's such a special small category. But what kind of customer came in for BMW? Was it the more, let's say, monolithic customer? Were they primarily the Saudis, or did you have also lots of other nationalities coming in as a BMW customer?
Again, Saudis is very specific. Uh, in Saudi Arabia, about 95% of the wealth of the country is allocated to approximately 2% of the population. So this means that the vast majority of the population lives with less than a family lives with less than $2,000 a month. So obviously that's not a BMW customer. That's why I had the impression before going there and working myself that it must be a very lucrative premium and luxury segment. But the fact is that, let's say, premium European, Asian, American premium segment is probably 10% of the total market, and then you have all these players who are trying to take a chunk of that. So the volumes are not high. I mean, if we look, Saudi Arabia surpassed 1 million registrations last year, which was obviously a top 20 market. But the premium segment is quite small. Now, the contrary to, let's say, the UAE or Dubai, uh, the number of Western expats that have high incomes is less than 2%. In Dubai, that's much, much higher. So although the population is lower, you have a lot of expats that also due to the lifestyle, they will buy premium vehicles. In Saudi, you're provided with a company car. The lifestyle is very conservative, so you don't even have to spend where to spend your money. Okay, apart from a mall or shopping or so expats don't very few buy premium cars. Then therefore, I would say that 98% of your 95 to 98% of your clientele is local, and more than half of them are employees of the public sector. The rest are business owners, professionals, so on and so forth. And obviously, these are very affluent people in the local communities, and they're also very demanding because they travel. They own properties in France, in Switzerland, in Germany, in Italy, in US. They are clients of these premium brands in Beverly Hills, in London, in Zurich, or wherever. And their expectations, they fly Emirates or Saudi business class, which is a top experience. And when they buy a similar branded vehicle in Saudi Arabia, they come and they expect that they are going to receive the same type of service. And that's where the challenge really picks as the human resources you have at hand, whether it's due to academical knowledge, whether it's due to business experience, or even exposure they've had to such an environment, is not there. So just to give you an example, when we launched the 7 Series, the previous generation 7 Series, so we went to Munich, and there was a big program by BMW to train the after sales staff on the what they call the GKL. So it's, let's say, the S class segment, 7 Series segment, how you should treat these clients. Now, to us in Saudi Arabia, since Saudi Arabia is the largest uh, general distributor with the highest market share in terms of 7 Series, we had 40% share of our sales was 7 Series, and was ranking fifth in the world in 7 Series sales, although the market is small. Uh, we were accustomed to a degree, but the challenge is that uh, you have service advisors who are getting a salary of $1,000. They come from subcontinental Asia or they come from the Middle East. They have been in the past technicians, or they come from very humble belongings, and their income doesn't even allow them to enter, let alone fly business class, to enter a four-star hotel and see how these customers are treated. So we are asking these people, and we're saying, you need to treat these people with the utmost, sensitivity, and these people don't understand the language you're talking about. So one of the things I used to do actually is I used to ask my service managers once a year at least to take out the service advisors to a high end hotel and just spend half a day there, buy them lunch, and explain to them or give them some feel of the experience that this client is expecting from us. Uh, so this is an approach I was taking. Did it work? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But this is the thing: you have to try and bring that relevance of the experience, which inherently that just doesn't exist. I mean, you need to force that somehow.
How can you expect them to know what they don't know, right? If you've never seen the inside of a
Exactly.
5-star or 6-star hotel, how do you expect them to be able to handle customers in a 5 or 6-star way? They simply have no exposure to that. I think that's brilliant to take people to a high-end hotel for lunch to witness this. Um, Obviously, I would imagine you have to explain almost step by step. Why is the waiter doing this at this time, right? Things like this, just to add the context onto it. But very brilliant.
We spent 2 years to 2.5 years educating over 300 people, I would say over 700 people. And these were the customer contact people. We tried from start. We create a custom training program, and we start with the complete fundamentals of how do I talk to a client? Why is a client important for me? I remember I am new. I walked into the BMW showroom. I mean, I had been announced. People had not seen my face. So I said to one of my managers, I said, I want you to drive me to one of our dealerships and just let me walk in as a client. And so I walk in as a client. I remember it's a Thursday evening, which is like a Friday evening in the Western world, and it was also Ramadan time, which it's always pretty busy. And I walk in and I see a kind of a chaos in the showroom. So there is several salespeople. Uh, I guess they're salespeople by the way they were um, communicating, because I couldn't tell from the dress code. And they're walking around and talking to people. There's guys serving customers with coffee and tea. And then I said, okay, let's see if someone's going to pay any attention to me. So I started working around the cars, and I remember that I was clocking this. And for 12 minutes, absolutely nobody turned around to talk to me or look at me or come towards me, although there were people on their phones or, just hanging around. So they when went back to the office on Sunday, I called the regional sales manager, and I said, this is under your region. He said to me, yes, sir. I said, okay, I want to see you. And I said, I want you to organize, you're coming to the office because I want to talk to you, and you're going to organize today a meeting uh, at the afternoon shift with all the sales team. So the guy came to me and he said to me, yeah, these people are very experienced, and I cannot tell them what to wear and what not to wear, and they're booking a lot of cars. And I said, okay. I said that's one side of it, but the other side of it is that people expect to see how the brand should be represented when they come in, and they don't see that. They see a bazaar. And I got the guys to come and talk to them, and I explained to them, I said, guys, you're lucky you work for a great local company and a great brand, and a lot of uh, salespeople are envious uh, because they work for lesser brands to a degree. And the expectation from you is that you behave in accordance with the brand philosophy. And so I told them that, that I want you to take care of the client. I want you to be dressed properly. I want you to do the fundamentals. And when we finish the conversation, the top selling guy comes to me and says, boss, can I talk to you? I said, yeah, sure, of course you can. He said, my name is so and so and so. He says, you don't like me, boss, huh? I said, how can I not like? I don't even know you. I just met you. He said, yeah, but he said, what you explained, the way you described that you want us to work, I don't work like that. I don't want to work like that. I said, look, let me explain to you something. I said, I will be monitoring your CSI scores or whatever measures the qualitative aspects of your work. I said, if the client, you're going to apply for sure the dress code and some other stuff. If the clients are happy and the outcome for the company is positive and the brand, I said, you're welcome to continue what you're doing. But if you're not, you either have to adopt, and I will train you to do that, or then we have to discuss again and see what's going on. Now, it's very interesting the history with this guy because he was actually our top selling uh, guy, but he did not want to follow any rules, and he was giving the bad example also to the newer generation that we were bringing in. And eventually, uh, the sales manager is asking him to follow the sales funnel management process. He's not only ignoring, but he's arguing with him inside the showroom, and he's telling the other salespeople these all rubbish, and it's not that it doesn't bring any sales. And the sales manager comes to me and says, "You know what? I've had it with him, and that's it." So I said, "Okay, let me invite him to the office." And the guy comes over, and I said to him, "Look," I said, "you don't want to align yourself, and that's a problem." He said to me, "Boss, that's the way I work, and that's the way I am going to continue working." So I remember I got off my chair, I gave him my hand, I said, "Thank you for your service, but I think we'll have to part ways." And the guy was shocked for a while. And then he went to HR, and HR told him, "Well, if Mr. Stavros told you, you have to go, you have to go. That's the way it is." What was the moral of the story? The moral of the story was that from the day that this guy left, I we started seeing an improvement in behavior of the rest of the sales team. Did we lose sales due to him? Yes, we did. We lost some sales because there were people that were for many years loyal to himself. But at the end of the day, I had to find a way somehow to manage the team. And due to the fact that all the cultures in that sales team were of similar background, in the end, I will use the term loosely. Disciplining was the only way to give them a direction, to show them by example that, you know what, we will debate, we will train you, we will do whatever we want to do. And there was another guy at JLR. I remember I walked into the showroom, and he did not get up from his desk to welcome me. And I walk up to him, and I said, I think his name was Abdulaziz. I said, "Abdulaziz," I said, "shouldn't you come and welcome me? I mean." And he said to me, "You're coming to my house. Why should I get up and welcome you?" So that was a day I said, we need to do a custom training program, and we need to train these people. And we saw a huge improvement, but it was a very lengthy process that took us about 2.5 years. But again, it's understanding. I was trying to bridge the customer expectations with the reality I had on the sales floor.
The brands are often obviously defined in their home country, right? So there are certain assumptions that go into what is that brand, and how should you behave in the showroom or in the workshop according to that brand, right? And then taking that assumption and trying to overlay that onto employees from a patchwork of different cultures is such a challenge if they don't understand the Germanness, for example, of BMW, and the process orientation that the Germans have, during the sales process and tracking, and you mentioned the sales funnel, that's requires a lot of KPIs and tracking, and that's not necessarily something that some of these cultures are familiar or comfortable with.
The other challenge is that obviously you need to negotiate, let's say, internally in the organization, and find a way to get consensus, because at the end of the day you need people behind you to move forward. Then on the other side you have the manufacturer who, like you said, has his own set and sometimes inflexible ways of doing things. And And then you have uh, people pushing you because they want to do a design or an individual program, where people say, oh, you need to be in Germany, people will wait 90 days for a car. Well, in Saudi Arabia, people won't wait for 2 hours for a car. They want to pick it up and drive like they want to do in the US. I remember conversations at MBUSA with our then VP, a dear friend today, uh, who was constantly chasing the field managers and trying to get the dealers to place orders, and wanted to see pipelines so we can manage the inventory better. And field managers were saying it just doesn't work like this in the States. It was the same in Saudi. I remember conversations with Rolls-Royce. We were the number two dealer in the world, and um, Rolls-Royce was saying, you need to build the cars, to customer order. Well, customer order for Rolls-Royce might be 6 to months to 12 months, depending, to build a car, build your own. And customers don't want that in Saudi. So I remember that maybe we would build to order maybe 6 or 7 cars a year. So, and the manufacturer could not understand that. They were saying, yeah, but these are people that, yeah, maybe somewhere else, not here. So as an executive, you need to negotiate with the manufacturer and try and convince them that I understand your way, but this is not the best way of doing things here. And then you're trying to convince or bring up the local staff and trying to convince them that, we need to do what we need to do. And then you have the client, obviously, who one day wants to be served the way like he is in, because that's the other thing, he is in Zurich, where if he books an appointment for an oil change, it might be 3 weeks, but he will respect that. And then if he calls in Saudi and you tell him it's 3 weeks for an appointment, he will just start, shouting at you because he thinks you're not respecting his time. So it's the environment is it's super challenging, and it takes a big stomach. It takes adaptability, and you need to be determined to succeed. Otherwise, and that's why a lot of the expats don't last long in the Middle East, because the challenges are multiple, especially in Saudi.
You lasted for 8 years in the Middle East, and of course now you started your own consulting company, also in automotive. Of course, how do you how would you categorize, or how would you prioritize some of the learnings you had, with your different international experiences, and are you still using these on a daily basis as you work on your current consulting projects, or are you localized more working on projects in Greece?
I have worked in projects in the US, in the Middle East, in China, and in Europe, and in Greece. In Greece, to be honest, I take some projects on to stay in touch with the local market, and obviously I have a lot of contacts from the past. Uh, what is interesting in Greece right now is that after the before the crisis, before the Greek crisis, I would say most manufacturers had established national sales companies in Greece. After the crisis, and with what's happening today, with the necessity for huge investments in electrification and all the other, whether it's autonomous driving or whatever the technology brings, all the manufacturers are looking to pull out and reduce their costs, and pass on distribution to local dealer groups. So what we see locally is, we see a realignment, I would say, of distribution groups and consolidation. And I'm working on some of those strategic projects, either with multinational, usually companies, or some local ones. Then I work quite a bit with the Middle East. I am quite familiar with that market. I understand it. I built a certain reputation while I was there, so people do reach out to me to help them in different projects. I don't. take on many clients, and I will explain why I do that. I had allergy to consultants. This is the funny thing now, and the reason being that what I had experienced is that my bosses or the boards or would decide to bring a consulting company in to help us with the project. So many times, and many of these big companies would bring a seasoned executive who was working as their head of desk or whatever. We would do a meeting for a couple of hours. Then this person would walk away, and then suddenly an army of young consultants and completely inexperienced would come in, and they would start analyzing the business. Then they would come and present us something that they had gone back to their libraries, seen similar projects, and from that they would come up with a proposal, which many times, unfortunately, was unrealistic or, you know, I would say partly acceptable. And so I guilty. I used to grill them quite a bit, and sometimes enjoyed it. And I was always saying, how can this? I'm doing this business for 30 years, and then you get a 30-year-old, who has been doing consulting for 2 years and came out of the university, now telling me what I should do to sell used cars in regional towns in Saudi Arabia. And the guy comes from Germany. So I said, okay, if I'm going to do consulting, first of all, I have been an executive for almost 4 decades. I have experienced the business. I have deep knowledge. Of course, I don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. I learn every day. But now I can actually contribute because I have seen so many uh, different situations in so many different locations that I can potentially relate to the problem of my client and offer him a solution. Part of the agreement is that once that I do the proposal or the restructuring proposal, let's say for example, or I will be part of the solution. I don't want to walk away. I want to sit with their teams and actually teach them, transfer the knowledge. So when I've left, they have actually learned something. I don't just pass on a presentation and walk away.
Stavros, thank you very much for joining us today. It was really an interesting conversation talking about your experience with Mercedes-Benz in Greece and in the US, and then your subsequent experiences with other brands, BMW, Rolls-Royce in Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, and also about how you've moved on to utilize and leverage a lot of that experience in your in your consulting company. So thank you very much for joining us and sharing that with us.
The pleasure was all mine. If I have a final word, I would say that any executive that gets the opportunity to go overseas, I think they should take that, and it will make you not only a better professional, but also a better person, as long as uh, you have a learning mentality.
Those are extremely wise words. I could not agree with you more. And I think all of the listeners will take those to heart as well. So, with that, I'd like to say thank you to all the listeners for joining us on this week's episode at the Auto Ethnographer. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Keep on driving. Thank you for joining us on today's journey. Please remember to like and subscribe to the Auto Ethnographer and leave us a rating or comment. For more information, visit our website at auto-ethnographer.com. You can also follow on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.